In 1994, the ICAC will start its third decade of operations. As ever, its first priority will continue to be to ensure that the civil service continues to set a conspicuous example to the rest of the community of freedom from malpractices of any kind. Despite our past successes, Hong Kong has become increasingly alarmed about corruption over the last year. In the first 8 months of 1993, the ICAC recorded a 44% rise in complaints about corruption received from the public over the same period in 1992. The increase affects the private as well as the public sector. I am determined that we give no quarter to corruption. We will provide the resources next year for the ICAC to set up another investigation group with nearly 40 officers. This will give the Operations Department more bite. The extra resources will also enable the ICAC to respond effectively to complaints during the 1994 and 1995 elections. In addition, another 30 officers will be redeployed to form a special working group to establish tighter links with the private sector. The community is, of course, worried that our business sector is becoming more vulnerable to corrupt practices. Equally, business leaders have urged me repeatedly to ensure that as the barriers to trade and investment are reduced around the world, Hong Kong's barriers to fraud and corruption are not lowered. Hong Kong has an interest in the removal of all obstacles to the flow of trade and investment. But there is mounting apprehension that our business sector will become tainted by the lower ethical standards it encounters when it embarks on production or financial operations elsewhere. Our businessmen are aware that our standing as Asia's leading business location would be in danger if we relaxed our vigilance against malpractices. In order to defend our business standards, I have directed the ICAC to launch a campaign in cooperation with the major business associations and professional bodies. The ICAC has considerable experience in helping businesses to develop voluntary codes of practice to prevent business malpractice. I intend to build on this experience, and we have set the following targets. The ICAC will invite listed companies to urge their officers and staff to conduct fair and open dealings with all customers, suppliers and contractors according to a corporate code of conduct. The code will identify effective channels of complaint from the public. We hope that other companies and businesses will quickly follow their example. The ICAC will then invite all firms employing 100 staff or more to adopt similar codes of conduct to enhance the integrity of their business operations. Chambers of commerce and similar organisations will be asked to urge their members to follow procedures which minimise the opportunities for malpractice according to a code of conduct. The bodies which represent lawyers, accountants, engineers, surveyors and all the other professions vital to our commercial well-being will be asked to ensure that their existing codes of performance also encourage their members to be proactive in reporting corruption and in closing loopholes which allow malpractice to survive. Legislation has recently been introduced to give auditors of financial institutions protection in reporting fraud and other irregularities. This will be extended to the auditors of all listed companies. I wish to turn briefly to an issue to which members have devoted a great deal of time and effort, the question of British nationality for British passport holders among the non-Chinese ethnic minorities in Hong Kong and for the wives and widows of Hong Kong's ex-servicemen. It is very proper for this Council and for our society to ensure that the anxieties of these people are not forgotten. I have conveyed these concerns very vigorously to ministers in London. They have responded with formal reassurances both in statements to Parliament and in responses to the Executive Council and members of this Council. I have to say that these have not gone as far as Hong Kong would want. Let me assure this Council that I will continue to press the British Government as strongly as I can for a better deal for our ethnic minorities and for the wives and widows of our ex-servicemen. In a modern urban society, it's all too easy to ignore the rights and personal dignity of the individual. It's particularly important that the government should set its face against such attitudes. I'm therefore asking the Secretary for Home Affairs to take responsibility for human rights issues and for related policy areas such as press freedom and data protection. This arrangement will make it easier for the government to respond to the concerns of this Council and the community at large, some of which concerns we heard on the subject of press freedom only this week. Freedom from discrimination is one of the cornerstones of our open society. But I know that many people believe that we have given insufficient attention to whether half of our population, Hong Kong's women, are fairly treated and adequately protected. We issued a green paper on women's rights in August to ascertain the views of the public on how to promote equal opportunity and end discrimination. From the comments we've already received, it's clear that the big issue for many people is whether Hong Kong should join CEDAW, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. We shall consider constructively the very strong views expressed by members and the public on this point, and I hope to be able to announce our decision early next year. For the community as a whole, higher personal incomes and increased leisure mean that the arts have come to be enjoyed by a much wider section of the community. Not surprisingly, a vigorous lobby has grown up which advocates a much greater public commitment to the arts. We're currently spending over $500 million each year to subsidise the arts. But there's widespread support for the creation of a statutory Arts Development Council to give a new direction for the arts in Hong Kong and to ensure that in the years to come, the vitality and pluralism which are features of the local arts scene are nurtured. We've decided to establish a Provisional Arts Development Council in early 1994 to prepare the ground for the establishment of the full Council. We propose to give the full Council a generous financial start with a grant of $100 million. The additional funds will provide seed money to enable the Council to make an impressive start. They will enable the establishment of an independently staffed and managed council, supporting new art forms and activities. To do the job effectively, I will wish to appoint capable, committed members to the Council, people who represent a wide cross-section of the arts community and performers as well as patrons. I am pleased that Sir Joseph Hotung has agreed to serve as chairman of the Provisional Arts Development Council. In Hong Kong, we have the coaches and the dedicated sportsmen and sportswomen to achieve sporting excellence. We now have the facilities, the showpiece of which will be the new 40,000 capacity stadium due to be opened next year. The Sports Development Board and the Hong Kong Sports Institute will be amalgamated from the 1st of April 1994 under a bill now before members. We've spent more than $2 billion on new sporting facilities over the past few years and have recently injected $100 million into high-performance sports development and training to prepare our young athletes for the highest levels of international competition. Hong Kong is desperately keen to see its teams and athletes take on and beat the world's best. I hope the sporting community will rise to this challenge and bring home to Hong Kong a clutch of Olympic medals in 1996. There's one particular group that I would like to make special mention of this afternoon. I pay tribute to their conscientiousness, their loyalty and their dedication to the people of Hong Kong. I'm talking, of course, about our excellent civil servants. I know it has not always been an easy year for them. but I work with them closely every day and I know how they perform. Hong Kong is very lucky indeed to have them. The high standards reached by our civil service owe a great deal to the dedication and leadership shown by Sir David Ford. When he leaves his post of Chief Secretary at the end of next month, the civil service, this council and the community as a whole will owe him a considerable debt of gratitude for the commitment he has shown to Hong Kong's interests throughout his distinguished career. At the same time, I would like to take this opportunity to welcome warmly Anson Chan to her new post. I know that she will be an outstanding Chief Secretary and provide inspiration and leadership to the civil service in the challenging period ahead. The civil service responded enthusiastically to the call in last year's address for a new commitment to serving the community. Wherever I go, those civil servants who work most directly for the public talk of the difference it has made to their clients and to their own job satisfaction. Already some 30 out of 50 government departments directly serving the public have produced performance pledges. By the middle of next year, all will have done so. Some 20 departments have user or consumer liaison groups already in place. Over 4,400 government forms have been reviewed, 800 have been abolished or combined, and over 1,600 have been made more user-friendly. That is good for the government, good for the public. Over 30,000 civil servants have attended training courses on the new service culture. Encouragingly, the concept of performance pledges and the service culture has found a ready audience throughout the public sector as a whole. The Hospital Authority, the MTR and the KCR have taken the lead in this. 5 other statutory bodies have published pledges at our invitation. Others will follow. In December last year, we announced that we would investigate the feasibility of establishing a pension reserve fund for the civil service. As we stressed at that time, pensions are already secure. They are both a statutory right and a statutory charge on the general revenue, with pensions increased each year in line with inflation. In addition, both the Joint Declaration and the Basic Law guarantee that pensions will continue to be paid after 1997 on terms no less favourable than before that date and irrespective of nationality and place of residence. Nevertheless, I recognise that civil servants are worried about the future payment of their pensions after 1997. After detailed study, we now feel able to recommend that a pension reserve fund be established by resolution of the Legislative Council under Section 29 of the Public Finance Ordinance. Subject to this Council's approval, we also propose to inject $7 billion into the fund over 2 years, beginning this year. The fund's resources would be used exclusively to pay pensions in the unlikely event that they would not be covered from general revenue. I cannot myself imagine Hong Kong ever facing a financial crisis of this sort, but I believe that the fund will contribute to the civil service's confidence in its future. Much work on the details still needs to be done before putting the matter to the Executive Council and this Council. The Chinese government has indicated support for the general concept, but we will have to explore its views in detail. We also need to consult staff representatives. I trust, however, that civil servants will take my announcement today as evidence of the government's determination to act as a good employer and to respond to the concerns of its staff. I'd like to turn to the future of the civil service. As the head of the executive, I have a special responsibility to pave the way for Hong Kong people running Hong Kong. To me, this is not an abstract political concept, nor is it concerned just with the representation of the people. It also means we must ensure that before 1997, the government is led as far as possible by local people, in particular by people who can meet the requirements to serve as principal officials after 1997 in accordance with the Joint Declaration and the Basic Law. In other words, the posts of Chief Secretary, Financial Secretary, the Attorney General, the Policy Secretaries and some others will be filled by Chinese nationals who have no foreign right of abode. It is my intention to have in place a team which can meet the requirements of the Basic Law in good time before the change in sovereignty. Localisation has been our policy for a great many years now. We've always preferred the gradual approach. Over the last decade, the proportion of overseas officers in directorate ranks in the civil service as a whole has declined from 55% to 35%. The trend towards localisation therefore continues. But of course, progress is never completely even. There are always areas which are ahead of the trend and those which are lagging behind for whatever good reasons. From time to time, we have to take special measures to deal with particular situations, and there are two such that I want to mention today. The legal department is one of the most important government departments. It is, of course, one of those which must be headed by a qualified local person in 1997. Despite our best efforts to date, localisation has been slower than we and many others would like. Although the special measures we've already taken, such as the so-called double ladder and development posts schemes, are bearing fruit, it's clearly going to take time for them to work through the system. I've already said that we're aiming to fill all principal official posts, including that of Attorney General, with local officers who can meet the requirements of the Basic Law in good time before 1997. In the legal department, we also need a pool of qualified local people at the tier immediately below the Attorney General's level to provide for the future. This is not going to happen unless we take more positive action. Therefore, we will be making special arrangements to ensure that 3 of the 5 law officer posts will also be filled by local people by the end of 1995. To provide a better foundation for the future, we shall also be enlarging the development posts scheme and extending it to provide opportunities for local officers to be groomed and to act at the principal Crown Counsel rank. The Legal Aid Department is in a special category. Over 90% of its clients are Chinese-speaking. Its professional staff have direct contact with the public, dealing with subjects which are often of a very personal nature. Chinese language skills are an obvious asset. We therefore aim by 1995 to ensure that the director and 2 of the 3 deputy directors in the department are proficient in the language. We will also work to increase the percentage of officers in the other directorate ranks of the department who are able to communicate with their clients in Chinese. I hope what I have said will be seen by members of this Council and by the community as evidence of the government's continuing commitment to localisation. The dominance of local people in the management of programmes and services is, in my view, essential. Nevertheless, we must not forget that Hong Kong is an international city in which overseas officers continue to have an important place, a fact recognised by the Joint Declaration and the Basic Law. Those who cannot continue to be accommodated must be treated fairly. We shall need to work with the Chinese government on these issues as 1997 approaches. The existence of 2 sets of conditions for civil servants, one local, the other overseas, has helped fuel the localisation debate. We have narrowed the differences and indeed removed them entirely at the most senior ranks. We need to do more. The historical justification for the present system has worn very thin in the last decade of the 20th century. We propose that those taking up employment with the Hong Kong government should now do so on common terms and conditions of service. Consultation with government departments and staff will begin soon. We will also need to discuss our proposals with the Chinese government. A smooth transfer of sovereignty in 1997 involves a major effort to prepare the civil service for transition. This requires development of the knowledge, understanding and the skills required to work effectively with China. Specialised short courses to familiarise civil servants with China's systems and current issues are a standard feature of the government's training activities. We started a highly successful sponsored visit programme in 1987 involving exchange visits between senior Chinese and Hong Kong government officials. In July of this year, we began the Chinese Studies course in Peking for senior staff. By 1997, all our administrative service and directorate level officers should have participated in a formal training course of some kind related to the transition. The demand for a much deeper knowledge of China and its systems exists at all levels of the civil service. To fill this need, the Civil Service Training Centre will continue to develop training programmes for all civil servants covering different aspects of China's political and economic life. We also look forward to building up more contacts between Chinese and Hong Kong government officials through work visits and training courses. Let me emphasise the priority which the government attaches to preparing the civil service for the transfer of sovereignty. We must do everything necessary to see that the men and women in our civil service have the background and expertise to continue to provide an effective administration for this territory after 1997, as laid down in the Joint Declaration and the Basic Law. We will provide every support and encouragement for the civil service to do so. We look forward to cooperating with the Chinese authorities in this process. Since my arrival in Hong Kong, I've been repeatedly asked about the territory's future. In particular, I'm asked to explain why I should feel confident about Hong Kong's ability to remain one of the world's most attractive cities to live in after 1997, when we seem to have had so many disagreements with Peking over important issues which affect the future. I want to emphasise again that I am confident about Hong Kong's future as a good place in which to raise a family or make a career. Provided that the one country, two systems concept is fully implemented and respected, Hong Kong's special way of life is bound to flourish far into the next century. Let me explain why I believe that our community can take such a robust view of its future. First, I'm greatly encouraged by the breadth and depth of our relationship with China, a relationship which in most areas is constructive and beneficial to both sides. The level of business ties is the most obvious example of the successful relationships which we enjoy. Hong Kong's entrepreneurs led the world's business into China in the 1980s. They have the biggest stake in China's modernization, accounting for about 2/3 of external direct investment in the country. They have helped to make Guangdong probably the fastest growing region in the world. China's leading state enterprises have long played a major role in banking, transport, distribution and other key sectors of the Hong Kong economy. Their more recent investments in aviation, telecommunications and construction have given them an additional stake in Hong Kong's prosperity. The international business community has responded enthusiastically to the way Hong Kong institutions, such as our stock exchange, are forging new areas of partnership with their China counterparts. Some 672 international corporations have established their regional headquarters here in the past 4 years. The government, too, is heavily involved. The figures speak for themselves. In the first half of this year, 6 policy branches and 38 departments made a total of 166 official visits to their Chinese counterparts, and the flow is in both directions. Over the same period, 130 groups involving almost 1,000 Chinese officials came to Hong Kong. Policy branches and departments have developed an extensive network of direct contacts with their Chinese counterparts at the working level. Contact with Chinese government agencies and their staff is an increasingly regular feature of their normal working day. Let me mention just a few examples. Banking supervision. Cooperation between the People's Bank and our monetary authority covers both supervision of institutions and exchange of information. Infrastructural planning. Cooperation started with shared environmental concerns, but the range of contacts has expanded to cover wider planning issues. Cross-border crime. Chinese liaison officers are posted to Hong Kong to work with our own police force. Staff exchanges. Hong Kong offers training opportunities in a range of skills, from regulation of financial markets to airport management. I'm particularly encouraged that in these meetings we have wholly constructive discussions about common interests within the framework of the joint declaration. Hong Kong can do business with China now and in the future without losing its special identity, without losing its way of life. The relationship goes beyond the worlds of business and government. It involves an enormous tide of people in both directions, creating increased cooperation and understanding on both sides. The projections for this year show how fast the flow is growing. Cross-border flows will reach a new peak, with nearly 4 cross-border trips for every man, woman and child in the territory. The number of mainland visitors to Hong Kong will reach 1 million. The number of passengers to and from China passing through Kai Tak will be over 2.5 million, a 60% increase over 5 years, and representing 1 in 7 of all passengers. About half of our external telecommunications traffic will be with China. This close relationship with China is the product of culture, location and history. We have benefited enormously over the last decade from the increasing China dimension to Hong Kong's life. This is destined to expand still further. It's vital that we continue to take the fullest advantage of the opportunities which China's modernization offers us. In the months ahead, we intend to discuss with the Chinese authorities practical measures to develop cooperation in the main areas of importance to our working relationship. The exchange of information on major infrastructural projects in Hong Kong and Guangdong. The creation, with the advice and support of the Industry and Technology Development Council, of an applied research centre drawing together the expertise of our tertiary institutions and of the Chinese Academy of Sciences. Measures to encourage the cross-border flow of a wider range of telecommunications services. Our proposal, strongly supported by the Hong Kong haulage industry, for the opening of a 24-hour border crossing at Lok Ma Chau. I now turn to a matter which I know is of great concern to people in Hong Kong because it vitally affects their future and the nature of the society in which they will live. This is the work of the Joint Liaison Group. Britain and China have agreed in the joint declaration that they will intensify their cooperation in the Joint Liaison Group in the second half of the transition period. We're now well into the second half, yet the expected acceleration of the work of the JLG has failed to materialise. Instead, it seems that its work has almost come to a halt. It's therefore essential that we inject a new sense of urgency into the JLG. Hong Kong has a right to expect that the JLG performs and completes the task set for it in the joint declaration. There is no specific British interest to be served by resolving the outstanding issues on the JLG agenda other than our aim of governing Hong Kong as well and as competently as possible. But settling these matters will be of direct benefit to the Hong Kong SAR and China. Failing to do so will create unnecessary uncertainty and confusion about the transition and will call into doubt the continuation of Hong Kong's vital legal and commercial relations with the outside world. The issues involved are not generally political. They are almost always technical or practical matters which have a direct bearing on the lives of people in all walks of life in the territory. Let me give a few examples of what I mean. The Hong Kong government has put forward proposals to preserve existing arrangements for visa-free travel overseas for Hong Kong people after 1997. Ease of travel overseas is a convenience which Hong Kong people rightly enjoy. It also facilitates trade and tourism and thus makes an important contribution to Hong Kong's prosperity. If we cannot reach agreement on this in the JLG, it would be difficult to see how these arrangements could survive 1997. We're in the process of negotiating a network of air services agreements between Hong Kong and key aviation partners, which will extend beyond 1997. A number of initial agreements are now under consideration in the JLG. If we are unable to complete this programme, the effectiveness of Hong Kong's existing civil aviation relationships will be called into doubt, and Hong Kong's reputation as a major centre of international civil aviation will suffer. We're negotiating agreements with a number of countries to enable Hong Kong to return fugitive criminals to their country of origin and to get back criminals who flee from Hong Kong. These agreements play an important role in the fight against international crime. If these agreements are to remain valid after 1997, they must be cleared through the JLG. If they're not all in place by 1997, our ability to fight international crime will be impaired and Hong Kong risks becoming a haven for criminals. The JLG is currently discussing who will be entitled to enjoy the right of abode in the territory after 1997. This is an issue of vital concern to people both of Chinese and non-Chinese origin in this community. If the JLG were to fail to reach clear-cut conclusions on this important issue, some members of our community would face real uncertainty about their future in the territory. These are just a few illustrative examples. The full list of outstanding JLG matters is a daunting one. But there is no acceptable reason why the experienced teams on both sides should not be able to deal quickly and efficiently with these matters. They owe it to the people of Hong Kong to ensure that their agenda is completed by 1997. We must also look to Hong Kong's legal and judicial systems. Legislation will be drafted to establish a court of final appeal on the basis agreed by the JLG in 1991. I appreciate that some members have expressed reservations in the past over the agreement reached with the Chinese government. It will be incumbent on the administration, when bringing the bill forward, to convince both you and the community that it is a sensible and honourable agreement, one that is consistent with the relevant provisions of the joint declaration. The ultimate decision will rest with this Council, but nothing, I believe, will do more to build trust and confidence in our judicial system than the smooth and effective operation of a court of final appeal well in advance of 1997, with the firm guarantee of a life beyond that year. It's urgent that we prepare for the change of sovereignty in 1997 by pushing ahead with adapting and localising our laws to bring them into line with the provisions of the Basic Law. A special unit has been established in the legal department to advance this important work. In the years ahead, we intend to allocate additional funds to the unit to ensure that work remains on schedule. We'll need to introduce into this Council a large number of bills in the next 3 years to localise our legislation. We've included 10 in the 1993-94 legislative programme. There's a great deal to be done and not much time to do it if we're to ensure that we have a complete set of laws capable of continuing beyond 1997. If progress in the JLG does not speed up significantly, there is a high risk that the work will not be finished before 1997 and we will then face a legal vacuum. It would be irresponsible of us to let that happen, and I am determined that we should do everything possible to keep to our target for this extremely important exercise. It will also be vitally important during the transition to improve the efficiency of our courts. With this end in view, this Council has approved the appointment of a judiciary administrator to take responsibility for promoting a service-oriented culture within the judicial system. We expect to have the new administrator in place by the end of this year. At each level of the court system, judicial leaders will be appointed, again tasked with promoting efficiency. In addition, the Chief Justice will chair a high-level working party comprising members of the judiciary, the legal profession and the public, through which a thorough review of existing administrative systems will be conducted to determine how and where improvements can be made. Getting the mechanisms, the systems, the agreements in place cannot be our only goal. No less important is the task of developing confidence and commitment about the long-term prospects of Hong Kong among the community at large and among Hong Kong's partners around the world. In the last resort, confidence in the future depends on individuals being convinced that 1997 will not mean an undermining of the personal liberties which they enjoy and which are a vital ingredient in our separate system, our special way of life. Both the Joint Declaration and the Basic Law seek to provide the community with assurances on this score, but there is more that could be done. The Joint Declaration lays down that the provisions of the two international covenants on civil and political rights and on economic, social and cultural rights as applied to Hong Kong will remain in force after 1997. But it would be a very welcome step if the Chinese government were to become a signatory to these two covenants. One year ago, I announced in this Council a number of proposals for constitutional development. These fell into two groups. The first group of proposals was designed to strengthen the effectiveness of our executive-led government and its accountability to this Legislative Council. I proposed that to enable the Executive and Legislative Councils each to play their proper roles, the non-official membership of the two bodies should, for the time being, be separate. This has now been achieved. I proposed a new Executive Council without representatives of political parties, and we now have that too. I proposed last year that the Governor should be replaced as President of the Legislative Council by an elected President. You, Mr. President, then took office, and I am now answerable to this Council as head of the Executive. Over the last year, I have attended 10 question and answer sessions of this Council. I also proposed that the Government should work with members of this Council to develop new arrangements for your own administration and support facilities. Much work has been done on that, and I'm glad that a new Legislative Council office will soon be established. Finally, in this first set of proposals, I suggested a government LegCo committee where the administration could discuss with members of this Council the handling of the administration's legislative and financial programmes. I remain convinced that some form of mechanism is needed for the purpose I have identified, and I'm ready to consider any recommendations that members may have. Those then were the first set of proposals that I put forward last year. Generally, there has been good progress on them, and I believe that both the Executive and the Legislature have benefited. My second set of proposals last year concerned the arrangements for the 1994 elections to the district boards and the 1995 elections to the municipal councils and the Legislative Council. The purpose was to ensure that those elections were open, fair and acceptable to our community, and at the same time, within the framework of the Basic Law, so that continuity through 1997 could be achieved. There were 6 proposals. First, the reduction of the voting age from 21 to 18, as in China, Britain and elsewhere. Second, a single vote, single seat voting system for geographical constituencies. Third, replacement of corporate voting by individual voting in all the present functional constituencies, and arrangements for the 9 new functional constituencies to enfranchise all the remaining eligible voters in our working population. Fourth, developing the role of district boards and abolishing appointed membership on these and on the municipal councils. Fifth, the establishment of a boundary and election commission. Sixth, that the election committee, which will be needed for 1995, should comprise members who have themselves been elected. I suggested that the simplest way to achieve this would be to draw all or most of its members from the directly elected district boards. Of these 6 proposals, only the 5th, the establishment of a boundary and election commission, has so far been fully implemented. The first part of my 4th proposal, developing the role of district boards, has been implemented, but all the rest remain so far unimplemented and are the subject of discussions with the Chinese government. I explained last year why it was necessary to discuss these proposals with China. It's clear that our community wants fair, open elections. It is also clear that the community wants continuity after 1997. People naturally want to be confident that the members they elect in 1995 may expect to serve a full 4-year term in this Council. That is why I said last year that my proposals would require serious discussion with Peking, and why I made it plain that they were proposals, not final decisions. From the outset, we were prepared for a serious negotiation. In the event, it took many months to get talks underway. There have now been 12 rounds, the British team being very ably led by the ambassador in Peking, Sir Robin McLaren, and including members of my administration. In addition, the Foreign Secretary and the Chinese Foreign Minister have discussed these matters twice in the last 3 months. It is a matter of regret that I am not yet able to report agreement on any of the matters covered by my proposals. The negotiators have agreed that the content of their talks shall be confidential, and I shall not breach that understanding. But members of this Council have a right to know about the British approach to the talks and the status of my proposals, particularly in the light of press leaks about new proposals tabled by the British side. I can confirm that the British side did table revised proposals in July and August this year. These differ in respect of the arrangements for functional constituencies and the election committee from the proposals I offered in this Council last year. In all other respects, the proposals are the same. They are proposals that we would be prepared to recommend to this Council if they formed part of a satisfactory overall agreement, which must, of course, include acceptable arrangements for the through train. Because of the confidentiality undertaking, I do not want to be specific about the nature of the revisions. In general terms, however, we have made 2 major moves in an attempt to meet Chinese concerns. First, we have devised a new proposal for the 9 new functional constituencies, based on organisations, as the Chinese have argued, and with a total eligible electorate of about 1/3 of that in my original proposal. We continue to insist that electors should vote individually, not corporately. Secondly, we have tried to meet China's preference for a four-sector election committee of the kind set out in the Basic Law for the post-1997 election committee. We continue to argue that all members of the election committee should themselves be elected. I repeat, these are major moves. They were not made lightly, and they are not, through its elected legislature, makes the laws that govern it. You are both the rulers and the ruled. That is why democracy is both a high privilege and a heavy responsibility. I say all this because I believe it to be true. And I say it as well because I am growing to love Hong Kong as you who have created it from rock and scrub love Hong Kong. And I want, as you want, to see Hong Kong as it confidently enters the next millennium under Chinese sovereignty, a blazing beacon of good fortune, a dazzling example of what free men and women, putting adversity and hardship behind them, can together achieve. That is what we want. And that is what we can achieve. All we require is to keep our confidence in the values that bind us into a thriving community. With the courage that has brought success in the past, and the confidence that success has earned, everything is possible. I believe that, and I believe that you believe it too.
In accordance with standing orders, I now suspend the sitting until 2:30 p.m. tomorrow afternoon.